Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing wonderfully today. Thank you so much for stopping by this video. I hope it's a fun one to watch. So I've got Berlioz here again. Berlioz, are you going to say hi? No? Are you not going to be chatty for me today? There you go. Berlioz says hi. So in this video today, I'm going to show you how I went about approaching the digital rough keyframing stage of this little berry mouse animation. So to start off with, as you can see, the first set of super rough drawings are in place, and these are the ones that I showed in the video that I uploaded before this one. And I'm just starting to draw in the very first keyframe of my little mouse. So the drawings at this stage are still quite rough, but as you can see, I am starting to put in a far more defined shape to the little mouse. So I've lowered the opacity of the super rough drawing underneath, and I've turned off all the other layers. So I am just focusing in on this one little keyframe and getting this pose right. So I really enjoy this stage because it's the first time that I'm able to actually just draw without really thinking too much. So I can kind of lock in to the task and focus because I've done most of the thinking and planning at the rough stage. I have. Yeah. Okay. Did you just come up onto my desk to say hello? Okay. He's gonna start singing the song of his people behind me. But, so as you can see, Berlioz throwing me off. You can see how often I'm needing to select certain areas and transform them. Or I will need to use the liquify tool, and you'll see that a lot throughout this video. So I use the liquify tool to move head positions or ear positions, the length of the tail. And this was something that I mentioned in my last video about why I was struggling to get on with Procreate Dreams so much. Those are functions that I rely on a lot when I work digitally. And in Procreate Dreams, having to go out of one interface, so go out of the flipbook interface where you're drawing and where I would need to use those tools, I would have to then go into the timeline interface and do it in a way that feels really counterintuitive and quite clunky. It was one of the biggest negatives about Procreate Dreams, so I'm actually really glad that they're at least addressing that in the 1.1 update whenever that's going to arrive. So that's really cool, and I know a lot of animators who are really looking forward to that. But going back to this animation, one of the biggest areas that I struggled the most, and I actually struggled with it in both the digital version and the paper version, was the little section of the walk cycle that this mouse has to do. And in the digital one, I think the problem started with not really thinking through the two keys either side of that little walk section properly. So the pose where he is just about to let go of the mushroom and he's crouching, and then when he's going to go and pick the berry up, because I just drew what looked like a nice pose without really thinking through the mechanics underneath of how the little mouse would get from standing to crouching to walking, and then coming out of the walk cycle to a stop at the other side, and then going to pick up the berry. So all of those little action beats need to be properly staged, and I don't think I managed that on the first pass of the digital version. And then I made the exact same mistake a second time in the paper version, which I guess is both funny and embarrassing, and it's a really good argument for not watching K-dramas while I'm animating. So I'm not quite at the milk car level of not having music on, but having a TV show on while I'm animating isn't going to help me focus. And in the end, this whole process of just drawing in the keyframes took me about 8 hours to do across 2 days. So it was still pretty fast. I think it was about 460 frames, so that would be about 230 drawings or so. So 230 drawings in 8 hours is still really intense. But I definitely started to tune out every few drawings about halfway through. And I would draw in 1 or 2 frames, and then I would go and watch a video from the Hoof GP, and then I would draw in another frame, and then go and Google something completely unrelated to animation that I really needed the answer to right then. And one of the biggest indicators of starting to lose focus with it was once the little mouse gets back up onto the mushroom. I've decided it's a mushroom, by the way. I wasn't really sure whether it was a mushroom or a stump while I was painting it, but I've decided it's a mushroom now. But yeah, so I really had to start changing the super roughs underneath the keys because the size of the character changed way too much for me to be able to just ignore it, and it was starting to having a direct impact on the way I was drawing my keys. And it's one of the risks with straight ahead animation. So I mentioned in my last video that the super roughs underneath are all drawn straight ahead, right? And the problem with straight ahead animation is you will end up with size changes of your character as you animate if you are not keeping a really close eye on it. So they'll shrink and they'll grow in volume as time goes on, and you'll end up with like a disproportionate head or a body, or they'll suddenly get tiny when they should be a lot bigger. So once I reached this part, I had to go to the sketches underneath and change them to match the size of the mouse from the very first frame. And it's good practice, especially if you're working in Procreate. You can add your first frame as a layer at the very, very top of the hierarchy and set it to a foreground layer. So then you can move it around the canvas easily to check your volumes as you go. And with paper animation, I'll usually match the volumes by using like the previous frame. So I'll draw in the rough position of the character of the frame I'm working on, and then I'll use the lightbox, move the paper, and just, you know, check it to make sure that everything's accurate so I can kind of keep an eye on it. But here, in this case, I needed to increase the size of Little Mouse because it is a massive difference in size at this point. Like, he was so tiny in comparison to that first frame, and ears look wrong as well. So I had to do a lot of editing in this part to make sure that he was staying on model. And that's really an argument for why Liquify Tool is so like crucial for me. But it's also where like I really started to get frustrated with it. And if this had happened on paper, I would just erase it and draw it again. And I don't know why it's so different between the two that it seems like such a farce to actually redraw the whole frame digitally, whereas on paper it's just like, 2 seconds, not a problem. So I think it might be because I can actually like zoom in digitally and then it feels like a bigger drawing, and that costs more energy. And you know, speaking of energy, you can see where I've written like straight ahead roughs on the charts. That's me not wanting to use the brain space to tackle how he should be chewing at this stage. So I just sort of handed that off to future me to figure out, instead of having to figure it out at this stage, because I just wanted to draw the keys and not have to think about breaking the action down. And by that stage of the animation, even where like Tiny Brown Mouse first appears, my first thoughts at that point were like, yay, Tiny Brown Mouse is here, I'm almost done. And then I remember that all of the action I've got left to do. And even as I'm just looking back through this video now, like I can feel the fatigue that I was feeling when I was animating, like even at this stage. And rough keyframing really is early on in the process. You know, there's a lot of animation left to do after the rough keyframes are done. And the issue here was that I hadn't broken this animation up into smaller chunks that were more manageable. I was just working across the whole animation all at once, and that got overwhelming. So in psychology, it's called chunking up or chunking down, so more specifically in neurolinguistic programming. And it's worth looking into if you like regularly struggle with tasks and information, like if you're feeling lost in lots of detail or a huge task list is overwhelming, then you can chunk it up and get a broader view of the overall task, and it lets you get a better sense of direction. And then if you're finding a task massive and there's so much left to do, you can chunk down into like smaller sections of manageable tasks. And that's what I really needed to do with this digital animation, and it's why it was causing me so many problems. And my solution to all of that ended up arriving all at once when I realised that I was getting tired of working digitally as a whole. I'd reached the point of exhaustion with this process. I'd already moved back to painting the backgrounds traditionally, and as soon as I realised that the solution was really easy to just go back to animating on paper, it was like everything just clicked into place. And I've got one more video to go after this one, I think, before I recorded the small break that I actually took where I had this lovely epiphany. which was, it was just a morning where I decided to go sit down in the garden with my dog Moose, and then everything just clicked into place. And looking back on this now, after I've gone back to paper animation, I can see just how different my two methods actually are when it comes to the two different mediums. So I thought they were pretty similar, but actually there's a lot of things that I do differently between the two. So when I'm working digitally, I'll work out like a lot of the action directly in the animation itself, and then I'll just press play quickly to see if it all works. Whereas when I'm working on paper, I'll use a separate sheet of animation paper to just make notes on and like do a lot of planning for the sections as I approach them. Or I will sketch out all of the keys for a section on a separate piece of paper and make sure all of the action and like the poses, so like the position of the feet and so on, all connect properly. And I'll use that as like my base sheet on my lightbox and turn it on and off as a guide. And then when I'm working digitally, I'll go through and I will draw the entire animation's keys in one go, and then I'll go back and fill in the rest of the frame sequentially. But when I'm working on paper, I just work like key to key, and I focus in on one section at a time because the action has already been planned out quite thoroughly first on paper before I start drawing, and I've got a clear idea of the action. And it's a really, really long-winded way for me to just say, try lots of methods. If you're trying to find a way that works for you, just try out lots of different things, because there are so many ways to work as an animator, and there's no real one size fits all, which is why I don't think I would ever try to create like how-to videos or market these videos as those, because I don't think I'm qualified in the slightest to try to tell you how you should do something, and I don't think I will ever be qualified to be able to tell you how to do something. All I can do is show you how I do it, and if it resonates with you and it feels like it's something that you'd like to try, then go for it. And I don't think experience is ever wasted. Like, even if you don't end up using the work you did, like I look back on these videos and I think it's so much work, but I don't ever feel a sense of waste because it still has value and it adds to your experience and helps you grow. So hopefully I'm going to remember all these lessons I've learned and not make a mistake like the walk cycle again. And this is where these videos are actually really helpful for me, because it's helping me to keep a visual record of what I've done so far and what my thought process was as well, because I'm a bit of a goldfish when it comes to remembering how I do things unless I do it repeatedly. So with a bit of luck, some of this is going to sink in for me, and hopefully it'll be interesting for you to watch it. So as I mentioned as well, I've got one more video to go where I'm animating digitally, and then after that point I go back to animating on paper, and then there'll still be some element, I think, of digital animation in my process because the colouring will still be done digitally. But I imagine from this point on I will just be animating on paper from here on in, because that's what suits me and it's the way that I want to work. And I'm not sure yet whether I will animate this whole sequence on paper or whether I will just stop when he climbs onto the mushroom and he starts eating. Like, I feel I want to work on something new, and I've been working on this one now for over a month, and for something that was just meant to be like a quick animation, I'm already twice over the amount of time that I wanted to allocate to spend on it, but we'll see. Let me know if you think that I should animate the whole thing, or if you're starting to get little berry mouse fatigue. And if you've enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. That is still really alien for me to say. I am not used to saying that yet. But I've got lots of videos already filmed and planned all about traditional animation and traditional painting, and I'm uploading twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays. And you can also come and find me on Instagram and Threads if you want to see what I'm up to. So at the moment I am designing lazy little sleepy cats ready for another little animation to go with a painting that I did up at one of my local castles. So yeah, I'm Thimbleloft on both of those, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Ciao for now! That's something my granny always used to say. Actually, she'd slap me if she heard me calling her granny. That's something my grandma used to say. Ciao for now.